Very good afternoon for everybody. Welcome back to the season 2, episode 3 of our Futures Forward webinar. And today we're going to discuss on the topic of the futures of work. So we are joined today by a wonderful moderator and a panelist. Before we start, allow me to introduce this wonderful friends of Executive Education Singapore Futures. Oh, by the way, my name is Ani Febriastati and I'm Associate Director here at the Executive Education Singapore Futures here at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. And it gives me a great pleasure to welcome friends and and colleagues here. Today we will be joined by first and foremost Dr. Gok Soon Ju, Skills Officers from Skills Futures Singapore. And we will also be joined by a friend coming all the way from Finland, although he's based in Paris, Vincent Lassalle, team head at Demos Helsinki. And also Linda Lee, Vice President People from Koda Payment Singapore. And of course, last but not least, my wonderful friends and colleague, Vignan, who will be moderating today's session. Without further ado, may I hand over this session to Vignan. And Vignan, over to you, please.
Thank you so much, Ani. I really appreciate that. I know I've been called wonderful so many times in one sentence, so it makes me feel really, really happy. But no, that's really enough about me. You won't hear me say much more about myself. Thank you so much for the privilege of being able to facilitate this conversation with the panelists that we have, with each other as well as with everyone who's watching in chat. And before I start us off, I did want to give everyone watching a little bit of a heads up as well. Though those of you who've joined us before for one of these things know we always run out of time for the questions, so don't be shy. Get your questions in as soon as possible if you want them to be answered. Use the Q&A feature. I'll be looking at that because if you get them late, chances are we're not going to be able to get to them, and we don't want that. But with that, I will actually hand the time over to Vincent, who will do a much better job than I can of introducing himself. He's a team lead at Demos Helsinki, but then I won't read out the bios that all of you have access to because you can read much better than I can, as I'll prove in a few seconds. But Vincent has actually a very interesting point of view. We were chatting briefly about this, about the purpose of Futures activities, as particularly in the future of work, and I'll let him share that with us. Vincent, please.
Thank you, everyone. I don't know if I'll do a better job, but I'll give it a try, definitely. I'm thrilled to be with all of you. Maybe briefly, Demos Helsinki is a Finnish, as the name implies, societal impact tank. So we basically work towards creating new solutions and implementing them in all matters of society. And of course, future of work is a really kind of crucial one. I think we were thought about because we did quite an extensive foresight project in 2017 for mixing unions, the state in Finland, large employers to create kind of future scenarios on the future of work in 2040, which I will probably not go into this because, as Vignan said, you can read and all this is published and free on our website. But maybe more interestingly, and I think this is a way of also the conversation we have today, at my understanding, or at least my hope, is that it's not so much about reacting to trends, but more using trends as a way to explore futures and decide what we want to do. The whole point of Demos Helsinki is to actually enable agency in all types of actors we work for, so states, corporates, NGOs, cities. And the question of future of work is actually really interesting and crucial because work is kind of society at large. A lot of the institutions we have today have been designed over the 20th century for that. Unions, obviously corporations, but also kind of our entertainment sector, urban design are all linked to actually how we work. And so it is a really interesting question. And I invite you to ask yourselves during this conversation of thinking, what is the future of society? What is the future of work we want to build? And maybe just very briefly in kind of the 2 minutes that I have left, I can maybe ask kind of 2-3 questions that out of thousands that we have, but that we're working on, and that maybe you can ask yourselves during the conversation, or that we can get back on the conversation, which are based on current trends as well. The first one maybe is quite kind of central, but what is the paid work that we want to have in the world? We've just come out of 2 years of COVID, where a lot of you, I imagine, have either been at home and having to take care of your kids, maybe of elderly people, and that was probably not paid. And the work that is paid in care is not particularly well paid in most countries, and also extremely, most of the time, feminine. And so that is a question we can ask ourselves, like, what is the type of work we want to pay? The work that Piketty, Thomas Piketty has done recently has shown that kind of capital pays more than work. Is that something we want in the future or not? And there's definitely a lot that can be done and said there. Another kind of question is maybe in a digital world, and I'm very happy to kind of stream in through the sky from Paris to you guys in Singapore, but the question of why do we want to meet? We now have these abilities to do things at a distance. What is the whole purpose of actually meeting in person? There should be one. Does it change the way we work? Over the last 2 years, we've seen that efficiency-wise, this has not been very impactful, but in terms of creativity, a lot of the ideas come from these conversations and from random conversations that you meet people. How do you do that in a virtual world, in a digital world? That's maybe another question of like how we want to be deliberate about this. And a final one, and I won't go over time, I promise, is maybe thinking that we're at a time where we'll get more and more, and we've seen it, kind of crises back to back. And if we just look at kind of international supply chains, we've had, blocked ships in kind of famous canals recently. We've had COVID, we've had more recently, very unfortunately, kind of wars that are disrupting our resources, our international supply chains. And either for kind of questions of security of a lot of nations, or the environment, using circular economy and new models, there's a lot of thinking to be had and choices to be made on what kind of manufacturing we want. Should it be more local? Should it be more ungrouped? So these are just, as I said, 3 of many, many questions, but that's either if you're working on policy, if you're in companies, wherever you are, these things should be, your opinion counts, and this is what we can build in terms of future. There we are. As an opening, I hope that's useful.
Thank you so much, Vincent. And thank you for making my job easier by asking questions already. So other panelists, feel free to respond to that. Everyone who's watching, please, if you haven't thought of a question just yet, put your responses in, right? And then we can react to them as well. And Vincent, you rounded that off by also talking about all the different actors, right, with whom you engage in such a process, and policy is a big part of it, which is a very useful segue for me to then introduce our next panelist, Dr. Gok Soonju. Soonju, you've so many titles, you've done amazing talks, presentations. The hat that Soonju is using today is as Chief Skills Officer with Skills Future Singapore. But with that, I will let her maybe pick a few other pieces of her personality and profile that she'll speak on today. Soonju.
Thank you, Wigner. I will follow Vincent's style to pose, but I'll do 2 questions. So at the end, the audience will have a couple of questions to answer. So Linda, you decide how many questions you want to pose. But before I pose the question, perhaps I'll just briefly explain to the international audience who we are. Skills Future Singapore is a government agency under the Ministry of Education. We are the National Skills Authority. Our responsibility include anticipating the skills need for our economy, not just near term, but even 3 years, 5 years down the road. And then we use that information to inform our education training partners to make sure that we have adequate, sufficient training programs to support our economic restructuring. And we also signpost to our citizens what kind of skills are needed. We provide funding support to defray out-of-pocket expenses so that nobody get left behind. I want to quickly come into join the conversation about what the future of work. And I just want to highlight a point that it is important to learn from history. So if we look back at history, generations and generations of human beings have gone through many rounds of conversation of future of work. from the early era of craftsmen to mass productions, to customizations, to the latest about digital economy. We have the way we label for pay job has been to a large extent impacted by the mode of productions, whether it's online, whether it's face-to-face, how COVID has impacted the mode of production has influenced the way we work. So the moral of the story is actually we have been there, we've done it, and human beings are really adaptable. So adaptability is one of our human agency to be able to adapt to change. But that alone is inadequate because the environment around us must afford the kind of resources, afford the kind of support given to us so that we can take advantage of it. So I think for future work to take place in a more amicable way, at the macro level, at the institutional level, policy thinking in terms of how the ecosystem coming together to support it is very important. And what's the societal value in terms of the kind of society you want to move into. And I thought that Vincent's report was very useful of engaging different stakeholders come together to have that very open dialogue about what is the desirable future of working condition, future of work. Day one in Finland, I think similarly in Singapore, we are very clear that we want a society where everybody benefit from the future of work, regardless of how our economic restructure. So I think that is quite important. And how do we minimize the skills gap? How do we overcome the kind of fear and concern we have and support the businesses to move forward and change? I think secondly, at the meso level, at the firm level, again, I think the way, how can company look at talent and skills to support their future business growth, to support the few directions moving forward? Can they be responsible as a not just a user of skills, but a developer of skills, and responsible in a way of developing the future workforce, not just about today's workforce, incumbent workforce, how they afford the kind of internship, afford the kind of contributing back to how institution in higher learning create their curriculum, I think provide the kind of advisory and have a closer nexus between supply and demand of skills essential. And then finally, at the micro level, individuals, I think we all must have the agency to say, hey, I want to take charge, I want to drive my own career change, I want to think about what kind of working life and what kind of career I want, what kind of paid job I want to do, and then how do I move towards that. I think we will need that macro, meso, and micro level coordinations to have a more win-win for kind of future work. Thank you, Vigna, back to you. Okay, sorry, my two questions. Follow-up inside, but two questions. I think the two questions to the audience and also to our panelists is, what does future-ready workforce means to us? So what does future-ready workforce means to us? Number two is, can we prepare for it to be future-ready? So that's my two questions. Thanks, Vigna.
Thank you so much. I'm quickly trying to do my homework properly and write down the questions as well. But thank you so much for that, Soon Chuen. And I really enjoy you've looked at this question and space at so many different levels and perspectives, right? And breaking it down into those perspectives, I think have been very helpful and very interesting for me, the questions that you're raising there as well. But I won't dive into my own questions just yet because, Sunju, you talked about, about creating that skills, right? Making sure that the market has the people and the skills that are needed. Then let's talk about the demand side of things, which brings me to Linda, who's the head of people at Coda Payments. And the reason why I'm particularly excited to hear from her is because she works in a company with people doing jobs with skills in industries in ways that didn't even exist a few years ago, right? The future is here for her as well. And thus I'm very fascinated to hear her perspectives, but also to find out more about her and her work. Linda.
Thanks, Vignan. So I'll start off by introducing Coda, sharing my thoughts on the future of work. And throughout that, I'll try to answer some of Vincent and Sunju's questions, and then I'll throw in my own questions at the end. So just to start off, Coda Payments is a tech company. We're headquartered here in Singapore. We've been around for 11 years now. And what we do as a business is we help publishers monetize their content, mainly through our B2C product called Coda Shop. And Coda Shop is an e-commerce website where customers can purchase digital content using local payment methods. And we are live in over 50 countries and growing. During COVID, our business grew massively. And in terms of people, we grew from 120 people back in January 2020 when I first joined Coda to nearly 500 people today in 37 countries. So we're extremely dispersed globally. 80% of our workforce is based in Asia, 10% is based in Europe, Middle East, and Africa, and the other 10% is based in North and South America. So that's just a bit about who we are, where our people are. Our roles are, primarily in engineering, marketing, customer support. Then we have our corporate functions like finance, legal people. So we have security people, we have risk people. So a whole range of different types of jobs that we have at Coda, and we are continuing to hire people in these roles in different markets. And just to share my thoughts on the future of work, I think as many of you may have realized, COVID really accelerated the evolution of work. I think the environment that we're working in today and what applicants and employees want in their future employer would have been very different without COVID. I think some of the current asks that we've seen in applicants and our existing employees is people want flexibility in where they work, how they work. They want more autonomy. People want a very clear shared sense of purpose. So what is that mission and vision that I'm working towards day in and day out? Well, I'm working from home, on calls 4 or 5 hours a day. They want a very positive company culture, strong values that are practiced, no matter the seniority of the employee at the company or where they are based. I've heard a lot of people wanting empathetic leadership. They want resources and benefits that support people as they're going through ups and downs while working from home and while navigating through COVID. I think the expectations that people have towards their managers and leadership in the C-suite is very different now. Like, they want people with very strong soft skills, people who can communicate very well in virtual meetings like this, can show empathy as people go through, different situations. L&D has changed a lot, definitely a lot less like classroom teaching. It's a lot more offerings through, virtual platforms like this. So these are some of the things that we're seeing in what people want in this new future of work. I think it's, given us a lot of opportunities to be more flexible and agile and embrace technology. But this doesn't come without challenges as well. We have so many fewer in-person touch points now. How do we engage and brainstorm and align, effectively as we did when we were all in the office and could just turn around to the person in the cubicle behind us and have a coffee chat or go for lunch, out of the blue. So those interactions are a lot more limited. So the ways in which we have to be connected and, stay aligned are very, very different. How we onboard and offboard people is so different as well. But I think that has also given us a lot of opportunities. So to just answer some of the other panelists' questions, I think, what is the paid work we want? I think that obviously differs depending on the person's skills, and the type of industry that they're in. But I think people, as they're working from home in certain industries, they want to know exactly what they're contributing to day in and day out. Why did we want to meet in person? It might be to brainstorm and collaborate on strategy or projects or future planning. Might just be to get out of the house and want to interact with other humans. What does the future-ready workforce mean? I think it means a workforce that embraces technology and is nimble and flexible. Can we prepare? I think without being able to predict the future, I think being flexible and nimble will kind of help us be prepared for whatever the future brings us. So I hope I've answered the panelists' questions. And my questions that I would love to maybe hear from the audience, maybe through the chat or through the panelists, is what opportunities has COVID given to you, and what kind of challenges has COVID thrown at you? How are you navigating through those opportunities and challenges, and what are some of the lessons that you've learned? Thank you. That's all for me.
Thank you so much for that, Linda. I think, and also appreciate you running through all the questions as well and kicking us off on that. I think one of the things that, so we've got questions from the audience, more will be coming through. We've got questions, your questions for each other, and my questions for you. So I'll let you think briefly about whether you have any immediate responses to the questions from each other on the panel while I quickly wrap up some of my thoughts. Because I think so far, one thing that has really been fascinating to me, a running thread through this discussion, is that Vincent talked about how a Futures exercise, the project, was really about getting people, the agents in this larger ecosystem, to make decisions, right, about the futures that we want in that. And we just also ran through what Sunju was saying about the work that Skills Future does. And this entire practice was so that people could make those decisions and could act upon them, right? That they weren't necessarily locked out of being able to act upon the decisions based on what it is that they want to achieve. And I think Linda gave us an amazing view on how much those wants have changed in that area. And it's also interesting talking about, like, you know, in the abstract theory where we are dreaming about wants, right down to the actually, how do we make sure that we pay 500 people across 37 countries actually work in the real world, and those limitations and restrictions that exist in this area. I think it's a fascinating spread. And with that, Vincent, Sunju, Linda, any responses to each other's questions? If not, I can jump in with a question of mine.
I'd like to respond to Linda's question about opportunity, challenges given to us during the last 2 years of COVID. I just want to share some one we've been through. It was very interesting. I think at that point in time, we were shifting office from Marina Financial Center. We're going to move out of CBD to like a suburb at the Paya Lebar quarter, and next to Paya Lebar. And we have to redo the whole office design, because we know the fact that this is the only one chance that we can get it right to design the future of workplace. Not so much that, because the senior management had 8 of us had a very serious meeting. We asked ourselves, are we going to make telecommuting a permanent policy? Which means a lot of flexibility, that people can work at home anywhere and come back to office for certain time activities. And then it was unanimous that we say, yes, it got to be that way, because we don't know what will happen when the next pandemic will come. We can't say that suddenly, no, we can't work in office anymore and technologies are involved. So we make the hardcore decision, say, yes, it shall stay, the telecommuting flexi shall stay, and then our office space is going to redesign in such a way that it will not cater to 100% of the workforce, because now not everybody need to go back anymore. Then how do we create more space where there are small pockets of area where people can have noisy meeting, quiet meeting, has the pod that have very secluded way of working and no one can disturb you. And we have to redesign the whole future of workplace. I think that was one of the key decisions we made. So today, all of us telecommute. I don't have office. We just go there and hi, anybody got a place, or just sit down and have a meeting. And the way we engage, exactly what Linda say, has changed too. We have have face-to-face just to engage each other. Sometimes we have team meeting for very serious discussion that we think we need a big whiteboard to write, and everybody can go there and change, because it's quite different. If we can't see each other's body language through a screen, we can't really say much. So there's a lot of this kind of changes that took place, and we have a very deliberate exercise to make sure that in the last Thursday of the month, we do some crazy stuff online together. It's called Virtual Connect, and we play things like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, that kind of stuff. Because we can't do a lot of physical engagement, so face-to-face engagement, so we just have to do that. So I think there was a lot of changes at that point. And I do say that the major change that I personally experienced is a lot of younger generation started to, I see that decided to quit the job and do something else different. They may find that it's fatigue that I'm doing this for a while and I want to leave. So we do experience some high level attrition that we never seen before. Suddenly just leave us. So last year was pretty bad. Never see that kind of the double-digit staff percentage of staff leaving. So yeah, this kind of sharing my experience at public sector. Thanks, Linda.
Thank you for that, Sunju. You know, you were joking about the social interaction, do crazy stuff every Thursday, but you know, running my own team now, that's actually the one thing that we haven't really gotten a good answer to. How do you do these social activities? Previously, you know, you could just get some drinks, get some pizzas, and it was done. But then now, if you do it online, it feels like another meeting, right? And that's the complete opposite of it, right? And that's one thing that I struggle with, right? With my own current organization, making that happen as well. Vincent, did you have any responses? Sorry to put you on the spot, but I figured you would.
Please, I'm stopping myself from like all the interesting things, so it's actually cut me off actually. But no, well, one of the things that I thought was, at least I thought about when in that discussion on COVID, is also that there's a very big difference between cultures in this. There was actually a quite interesting study, and I should have looked up Singapore. I apologize for not having done so before this conversation, but from data from Citymapper, so the app that, you know, the kind of public transport app, in different cities across the world during the kind of 2.5 years of COVID and with the lockdowns, and seeing how, compared to a normal baseline of non-COVID time, how much people moved about. And obviously when you had lockdown, you could just basically see, like, you know, just it went down to like 10% of what's usual, etc. What was more interesting was in between the lockdowns, depending on the different cities. If you look at, I'll take San Francisco and Paris just to have two different examples, but San Francisco basically went down to like, I think 6% of what the usual baseline is, and then just stayed there for like 18 months, going up slightly to, I think, 12%. So lockdowns, no lockdowns didn't actually make a difference. And I don't want to generalize on like millions of people who live in the Bay, but you can imagine that highly digital kind of work. So probably a lot of the infrastructure there, highly creative. So not much manufacturing jobs, not many jobs that require you to go to work. And also kind of a somewhat, and this is awful to generalize, but transactional culture of like quite clearly a meeting has a purpose, has a time frame as well. Our relationship to time is very different in different cultures. France, very, very different. Obviously went down to like 10% during lockdown, but human interaction is extremely important for us. Like the non-verbal stuff is very, very, it's a kind of complex, heavy culture for Sunju, who's a sociologist. And so between the lockdowns, we went back up to like 95, 100, 105%, because we kind of compensated for the fact that we didn't see people for a very long time. And so I think that obviously internationally and probably for Linda, this may ring bells of like all challenges that she's been faced with working in so many different countries. But even I think in our country, so even in Singapore, the different cultures in companies is something to be much more mindful about in how you do those interactions, to the point that I think, you know, the tools we have designed for ourselves as well are probably not that adapted in a way. Our calendars are very much designed for kind of 1 hour, 2 hour slots that we have back-to-back stuff like this, though this one is one of the nicer meetings today. But, and how do you schedule Viknan and myself? Let's talk. Let's have an interesting conversation. Let's do something together. How do we schedule that? Like, you know, how do we, should I come to Singapore and basically have an entire week of non-meetings And then every other meeting I do digitally for environmental reasons and stuff like that. But that's not at all Google Calendar compatible. Like, so I think we have to rethink in a way our tools, our way, and do it in terms of the culture of the corporations of the different countries we work in. At least that kind of social cultural difference, I think, is something to be extremely mindful and to be actually quite deliberate in the companies we work for, even more so than before. I mean, that's one of the things. There's a ton. But
yeah. I think it's a very interesting thing that you're raising, like, how do we navigate these spaces? And it just reminded me both of the remark that Sunju made earlier about having to redesign the office, right? Having the opportunity to do it. And Linda's sharing about that massively distributed workforce, right, that she's dealing with right now. Because pre-COVID, right, I was working in an organization. I had a team of about like 200 people, only one in Singapore, right, and that was me. Right. So effectively, I was in this remote world. I had to work from home anyway because the Singapore office wasn't conducive for calls. Right. So I've been working remotely for a year and a half before COVID happened. So when everyone's asking me, oh, what's it like working from home? I'm like, I haven't left my desk in 3 years, right, as my dining table. Right. So very little difference. But it's those decisions, I think, that are really quite interesting. And maybe to just kind of like dive into this like the decisions that we make in the office and those like tangible aspects, right? That these knock-on effects or manifestations of these decisions that we're making. I had a follow-on question, and sorry, Linda, if you wanted to re-respond, but feel free to hijack any timings. But I thought it would really be interesting to actually jump on one thing that Sunju had asked in her earlier session, not one explicit questions, but she talked about the roles that at the meso level companies, firms can play in building skills, right, rather than just consuming them. And I thought that you might have an interesting point of view on that, because you talked about L&D, about how you had to really change the way you do it and think about it. Also because you're in a space where, and I also come from the tech startup space for context for everyone else, and we're always struggling to hire, right? In terms of skill sets, it's a massively competitive market. A lot of times we have to build and train folk ourselves, right? So it's less about giving back, but giving to ourselves that the skills demand as well. But Linda, I was interested to hear your thoughts.
I just wanted to touch on Vincent's point earlier about
Yes.
like cultural sort of nuances and how we can reconcile that in today's workforce before I jump into the later point. I think, being such a diverse company, it's really hard to reconcile like how people give feedback in Jakarta versus Berlin versus the US. That's something that we're trying to grapple with and figure out as we try to foster a stronger feedback culture. And I was having this discussion with some of my colleagues, and we can't force people to just, be more direct or be more indirect, or, what it is. I think it's the conclusion we came to is, having certain guiding principles and values and elements of your culture clearly spelled out in your company, that should anchor everyone. So for example, like at Coda, one of our values is we acknowledge that we're stronger together. So we're very collaborative in how we do our work. We try not to be siloed or take credit when we really worked with other people to do things. I think those things that you practice day in and day out and that you communicate to new joiners and how you recognize people, that can really anchor and help to reconcile all these differences, which are a lot harder to grapple with when you're, meeting people and working with them through a screen and you hardly ever meet them in person and can have these side conversations and get to know them a bit outside of work. So I think technology helps because it helps us like connect with people over Slack or through Zoom or Google Meet. But it really kind of hampers getting to know people a bit more in depth and get to know them. So I think like a lot of HR teams and leaders have to think about, how are we going to reconcile cultural differences in this world where we don't see each other in the office in many companies. So just a few, points on that topic. On the other topic, I think Let me just think. I think like I mentioned before, we just have to be flexible. We can't really predict what's the next outbreak or calamity or thing that's going to hit us in our country or our region or in the world. I think, being mindful and listening to people's needs, and when you speak to candidates, when you speak to your employees is really important. I think not being really rigid and say that, like some companies in the US, they want people to work in the office 4 days a week, you must do this. And you can see people leaving these kinds of companies because that's not the kind of environment that they want to be in. So I think flexibility over like rigidity or, very strong rules on how we must get work done is what we need to think about for the future. And that trickles into like L&D, engagement, hiring, and so many other aspects of how we engage our workforce and how we hire people.
Thank you for that, Linda. Okay, I'll pause. I'll do my thoughts later because some interesting observations and questions have come through as well. I might collapse a few because there's some interesting thoughts. So thank you both to Roberto and Timothy for putting in these comments. I'll paraphrase them, but I'll borrow some language because I love these words about Timothy mentioned that today's head workers might be valued more than the heart and hand. Right. So you talk about those of us who work knowledge economies, as you call them, those of us are privileged enough, right, to sit here and have a Zoom call with each other, right? As opposed to those who work in production, as Roberto highlighted. And has this created a more manifest class schism between the two, right? That's manifested in so many different ways. Like, is it more difficult to hire? Linda, you mentioned expectations, right, on employees. Does that then create like almost two kinds of companies in the same organization for roles that can be done remotely versus those that can't? And then I think for the other panelists, there's also been a question about actually what's the role and even responsibilities of society and governments, right, about this maybe differentiating value to different work, right? And I think maybe just to round off that questions, because sometimes it seems to be oscillating between, obviously during lockdown, we all realized how valuable this work is, but in an abstract context in terms of we go to Windows and clap, right? Rather than being engaged in other forms of recognizing the activity. So I won't point fingers and all that. Who would like to maybe jump in on that? Otherwise, I'll ask Vincent to go because he's already started typing answers to everyone. So,
sorry, I was trying to, but yeah, I think obviously those are, in a way, that's why I asked the first question I did on what is the paid work what is the work we want to pay? Because yes, the future of work is very much the future of society. This is the inequality that we want to incentivize or not. This is the meaning, this is the value that we want to generate. Do we value the care work, the kind of physical work that our societies depend on? And we've seen it very much, as you mentioned. For the moment, the translation has been mostly clapping at windows. Very few countries have actually changed their policies towards healthcare, elderly care, manufacturing work, and to the point that of people also quitting their jobs. I mean, like America is going through, they're very good at kind of coining new phrases, but great resignation, I'm sure is a term that most people are familiar with on this call. I'm hearing that there's something similar maybe in Singapore, it definitely is in Europe. And though that is linked to probably inflation in some parts, or again, definitely for the US, part of it, I think, also is the amount of uncertainty about the future and about the meaning of these jobs, to what Linda was saying. And what is the point? Like, this is going to hurt my career. What career? I mean, I can be locked down tomorrow for 2 years with my kids and family. I can have to wait 7 months for a table that I'm buying online because the wood comes from across the world and is blocked somewhere in Europe, or whatever it is. Like, this is not my problem. Like, I'll just change jobs. I'll find something. It'll be much more short term. And I think that working on this and being quite deliberate and collectively deliberate about these things. Sunjo was saying about what are the skills. One of the things we're working on is kind of what we're calling at the moment as a placeholder, but green skills. So if you want, like 20 years ago, we were talking about digital literacy in people. So, you have to know a certain number of things to be doing what we're doing today, quite in a way, naturally. What are the skills today in addressing climate change in the transformation of work? And it could be very different skills, not only kind of working skills, but also mindsets, also posture. Would being able to have a proper debate with somebody who is opposed to you and to think this person doesn't agree with me, but that doesn't mean they're necessarily wrong. That would be maybe a very valuable skill in terms of uncertainty, as we've seen during kind of COVID. To have the posture of thinking we can actually succeed in addressing climate change, which is probably not the main mindset that people have at the moment. These are probably the skills that we want to build. And to the point of saying, like, the inequality between people, we have to be deliberate about these things. Not only what do we value, what do we want people to know, what should we ourselves know? That is my whole point about it's not only reacting to these trends of saying, oh, well, COVID has done this, so we're now working more from home. Should we? Do we want to? Is this something that we value or not? Yeah, freedom, yes, but at the same, does it create inequality that then is very difficult in a two-class or multi-class system? Is that something that is healthy for our society or not? These are, I agree, complex questions, but this is the really fascinating stuff of policy writing, of HR policy, of the decisions that we can make on the future of work. And I'll shut up now because it's probably going too long. But as you can see, I enjoy these topics and conversations. So
thank you for that, Vincent. And I'm going to shine the spotlight over back to Sunju, both in terms of responding, but also because I think you have a strong point of view both on the green skills. I think last time we had a conversation, we were talking about care skills, and the report also mentioned the digital skills. So you have a strong point of view.
Yeah, I fully agree with what Vincent said, because at the end, like I mentioned earlier on, is at the end of the day, the future of work is determined by how the mode of production, how the enterprises, how the businesses decide and plan for the mode of productions on one hand. On the other hand is really what the society value in terms of who gets good job. Does everybody get good jobs? How do we value everybody's contributions? And that's really determined by the society, I think, and every society may be different. But in Singapore, we truly believe that we need to respect and value, whether it's a head job, hand job, or hard job. We have to respect that, because COVID just proven that who is classified as essential worker, then we must allow them to continue working, are those people that cannot work from home. They need to make sure the healthcare system go on. They need to make sure that the road is clean. They need to make sure that the buses run. And these are the people that really we think that they are essential in Singapore. And the thing is then, how can we recognize and compensate them accordingly, and make sure that everybody has a chance to succeed in whatever career path that they chose, and not saying that everything got to be digital skills, and digital skills is the only one that pay. Therefore, I just want to value this. I don't think we should see that way. So the underpinning societal value is really important. And I really like what Vincent's job is, to rally the people all come together and have a conversations about it openly, and think about their considerations, and so that they can all go back and make their own decision. I think that's fantastic. And coming back to the questions on skills, it is a difficult, it is a, how do I put it? I think we need a field of studies to just talk about skills. In Singapore, we are trying to make it understandable to the citizens and as a common currency. As a common currency, to say that just like we talk about financial literacy, you know how to use your money. You talk about digital literacy, you know how to operate with digital tools and live in digital world. And we think that every citizens need to have the skill literacy, because you need to know what you have, what you can do, as from today, and then what you want to do as tomorrow. You must know how to move across. So that skills literacy, that how to be cognizant of what skill stock I have, how can I pivot if I need to pivot, and what are the foundational skills that I think Linda mentioned again and again, is that agility, that flexibility, that nothing is static, everything is changing. Can I move fast? Can I learn things quickly? Can I pivot, and not to behold too much about the past and this is my identity, I cannot move on. I think you need to keep changing. There are things that are foundational that regardless of where you are, what role you're in, that kind of skill set, we call it critical core skill for the 21st century or the future economy is essential. Then I think the rest of the vertical skills, how to use tools, how to use devices, how to work, that technical skills is to me is easy to acquire. You just have to learn it. You can use it. In fact, the workplace is the best place to develop this kind of skills because you have the direct applications. Green skills, hot topic. Yeah, I think green skill is it's not easy to because it's still very young, it's still very new, it's morphing, depends on the how the economy is moving and what alternative energy you're looking at. Is it nuclear? Is it fusion? Is it solar? So there's a lot of stuff. I think it's still in the early phase, but in Singapore we're trying to make sense of it now. We built I call it preliminary skills, green skills taxonomy. And I do agree with Vincent that we cannot just focus on the hard skills. The softer skills part is essential because to mobilize the people to move along, to change the lifestyle, change the habit of consumptions, you require a lot of the mindset about and the consciousness about, am I responsible to make the world less brown and more green? And this, the soft skill is really essential. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Before I segue to or lead, because I think that's related to a conversation that's come through, I just wanted to ask, Linda, did you have anything you want to chime in with before I whisk us away into another stream?
No, go ahead.
Right. Great. No, because I think this is the question itself also lends itself to all of your perspectives into that. And I'm going to mispronounce his name, but Thekla Low just shared something coming from their perspective of working as a sustainability strategy consultant. That question was an interesting one about advice on helping traditional sectors with traditional mindsets in terms of shifting, in terms of accepting new ideas like green skills and work arrangements as well. And I will say that they put in lots of these scare quotes into them because we know this isn't new or whatnot, right? Just yeah, but it is an interesting point, right? That about traditional SMEs and companies that may not be plugged into these international conversations, the kind of things that we are privy to as well. And I just would interested to hear your thoughts actually in that, because I think all of us work in different parts of that space. Don't all jump in.
Who do you want to go first? Like, I think we all can.
Yeah. Vincent, why not?
I feel Linda has been given the full, short straw.
Linda, would you like to go for? Actually, Linda, if you had something, it's just that I know her thinking face.
I'm reading the question and I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Well, then I'm happy to kind of at least get the ball rolling, and I'm then interested in the other panelists' views.
Please go ahead.
So our work on this, or maybe something that might talk to this point, which is a very good and important point. So I should have maybe mentioned this, but the society we're trying to work towards at Demos Helsinki is, and it's going to be big, vague terms, but we have very concrete ways of doing this. But it is a kind of more sustainable, more fairer, more equitable, but also a more joyful society. And by joy, what we mean is that actually a lot of the change that we're seeing at the moment, a lot of what consultancies, think tanks have done in the last century has been very reactive. It is basically explaining what is going on and trying to adapt to that. Since the inception of Demos in 2005, the whole point is to say, even in very, very uncertain times, definitely we live in, how do we make actors be proactive? You will understand that this is kind of a red thread in the conversation there. And so we've been very much working on these questions. And on the joy part, just to take this one in regards to that question, is I think we need to be more radical or help traditional actors or sectors actually rethink what that is. We can reshape what a sector is. I'll give an example on the kind of agricultural aspect and so on. One thing that we're starting to work on ourselves in a few countries actually is the question of, okay, actually a lot of our healthcare issues as a society in these countries specifically are linked to what we eat. Obviously obesity, diabetes, but also Parkinson, Alzheimer's, a lot of different cancers are kind of chronic systems. And our healthcare system is on a curative business model. You pay for the treatment. But what if we merge basically huge sectors of healthcare and agriculture into thinking, well, how do you do kind of preventive care through how you eat? And having lived in Singapore for a while, I know that food is also culturally very important there. So I think that will resonate. But to actually have questions that can we both address the environment and biodiversity issues, agriculture and healthcare together. So to the point of the question that's there is maybe it's not that sector that needs to change. It is actually reshaping and re-questioning what is the proper sector for the achievement in society that we want. And to give a very kind of small but kind of illustration of this, one city in Finland has actually created planet doctors, in Finnish, but which can give you, let's say you're slightly overweight and depressed, they can give you an actual piece of paper that you can use towards your employers of saying, actually, I am required to walk in woodland, like an hour a day, because that is better, it's physical work, so it'll help with my weight. Actually, it's been proven that connection to nature is better for mental health. And the more time you spend in contact with nature, the more environmentally conscious you are about issues. So it tries to address, and this is very small, we could rethink, the business models of the pharmaceutical industry would have a much more systemic approach here. But to kind of rethink even the questions we're asking, not only kind of thinking, how do we help this specific SME in this specific sector integrate these specific tools, and which are good questions, but you actually think, well, should it be this sector? Should it be this specific SME? Should it be through collaboration? And really re-question this, because that's my last point, but the connection to joy is that change under constraint is going to be much harder than aspirational change. We need things that we didn't have in our past. And at the moment, a lot of the changes that we're trying to do not as bad as we're doing at the moment. So, not to take a plane as often, not eat meat as often, okay, we will do it because the end result is survival of the species. So that's, pretty motivating, but it's not easy. Whereas if you start thinking, well, I'll actually get a healthcare system, actually, I'll be much healthier. I'll have a connection to the food culture of my country, blah, 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 which we lost for the last 50 years. That is maybe more aspirational and will help that change happen. Yeah. Sorry, very long answer, but.
No, thank you for that. I think lots of thoughts, also weaving in different elements and identification. Though I have to say that when you said slightly overweight and unhappy, I'm like, it's a very personal description there. But I'll go over to Linda for that response.
Oh dear. I'll just give a short response to Thikla's question, though I'm not familiar with the agricultural or manufacturing industry. I'll try to answer her question on how to help traditional companies accept and adapt new practices. I think it depends on how your leadership team and how your company thinks. Like, are they open-minded? Do they listen to people? Do they listen to what people want through surveys or focus groups or other forums? Are they aware of what their peers in similar or other industries are doing? Like what other companies are doing to be competitive and retain good talent? So I think it's a matter of how open-minded your company, your leadership, or your board is. And whether they're willing to make changes to adapt to today's workforce and today's working environment. So that would be my very short answer to that question.
No, thank you for that. And Linda, one of the things that jumped out at me is almost that the other shift has happened with COVID, right? Of course, acceleration of all these adoption, but also the fact that these people decisions no longer become an HR thing. Is no longer like, oh, go talk to the nice person in HR and they'll solve it. It's actually, to Sunju's point, work is fundamentally about the means of production, which is the nature of business, right? And I think business leaders are now realizing that the way that people work is a decision for a business to make, not its HR function as a standalone as well.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, things like employee engagement or like talent acquisition or retention are no longer like an HR agenda. It's part of the business and its leaders' agenda. So that's something that we've tried to inculcate at Coda, and we think, I've seen a lot of other companies make the same shift. It's like, having, good engagement scores or low attrition is not just an HR metric. It's a business metric that people should be aware of. And I think I've seen a lot of more companies hiring for HR roles because they know that, people with this level of knowledge and expertise and skill is important for their companies in this new workforce. So that's been rather interesting to see as I'm a very avid follower on LinkedIn. So, yeah.
No, definitely. And, I work in a very early stage, small startup, and pretty much our employee number 15 was a people person, a people partner, right? Very unusual for a person that size. Linda helped me write the JD for that role as well. And it's right there. It was my CEOs and founders said, no, write the JD, we want that person in now, right? Because it's too important for us to have like as important as an engineer now as well. But Sunju, I thought you might have interesting things.
Yeah, I thought that question, whoever asked that question, was it Timothy or somebody asked that question, was really apt. And I want to answer in two ways. One is in Singapore during the COVID period, I don't know whether all of us started to be read about it, that the government decided that, hey, instead of waiting for COVID to be over, should we take the opportunity and say, do some experimentations coming together, we create a kind of almost like a sandbox to say that, hey guys, so we coined that term actions for alliance. That means come together as a very small, sharp, and what the policymaker intended to do is we will support whatever experimentation you want to do, new business model, whatever. 3 months, come together, businesses, just go and try it out. That during COVID, what can we do? What can you do something about it? So that there's some experimentation of converting perhaps like Changi Airport, some corner of the Changi area, to say that we still allow people to fly in, but in another a highly controlled environment that you just meet there, you can't leave that environment, but you can fly to Singapore and still have meeting face to face, but the whole environment is retrofitted with safety measures in place so that you don't infect each other. This was one of those, and I think that concept of actions for alliance is pretty interesting concept to say, hey guys, if you want to try and experiment something by breaking some rules, they will just remove the rules for the time being, allow you to just experiment. And I really think that action-driven experimentation supported by removing some of the policy regulations is an interesting way to call for some creativity to take place. And today the Action for Alliance can be initiated by many other people who want to say, hey, I want to try this out. I found a group of allies want to try things together. I think you can just kickstart. I think that is something that is quite interesting concept. I thought we should share with all of you. The other thing, I want to come back to the questions about labeling businesses called small medium enterprise. The bosses are not forward looking and blah blah blah. But I just thought that all of us whether you are bosses, CEO or CFO or whatever, CSO, we are all human. And the concept I want to put forth is we ought to see whether we can reframe ourselves as working learner. Basically, we're a learner. We got to be a learner, because learner means we're curious, we want to learn, we want to try new things, we want to find out what other stuff we can do. So assuming the role, the identity of learner first, but at the same time we are working because we need to earn a living, isn't it? We need to pay our bill. So I think that working learner identity, to me, is what the future ready workforce ought to be, because we don't know what's to come. And if we are a working learner, means we continue to learn and then try new things, put things in place, and then experiments. It may be helpful. So it's regardless of your job title, we just got to be working learner. Yeah, that's my sense. Thanks.
No, thank you for that. And I think it did also respond to Thekla, who asked that question, had another follow-up asking, oh, okay, so, and this was before your next round of responses about whether that was therefore only a space for government or policy or think tanks to be in, right? That the SMEs and the farmers may not be interested in that aspirational goals. And I think that what's interesting about that is, like, Linda highlighting that, well, no, actually it's fundamental business, right? In terms of what these decisions are, and if they align with the business and the individuals in the business, then okay, make them. And I think, Soonju, what you talked about in that Action for Alliance, the experimentation frame, was very interesting, because it's almost by removing that space or removing the rule, give space, right, for the companies, and anyone can initiate them. You also add it, right, into that area. It's interesting, and that dynamic, I think, is quite an interesting one as well, which brings me to a question that I've been thinking since we started this conversation. I'll just ask it as well, where, we talk about this entire process being one where people come together, make decisions, and act on those decisions in them. Who might currently be missing from these conversations or processes or stakeholders and all that we might want to include and bring in as specific groups? And the reason why I say that is because, sometimes you speak to unions, then some groups may be underrepresented by those things, as well as if we talk to the CEOs of the top 100 companies in an economy, right? And then that would kind of also preclude the inclusion of certain things. I was just interested, do you think that there are certain voices that we could maybe benefit from explicitly bringing in these conversations? And anyone watching, please also let us know.
I think maybe people on the ground and people who are more introverted and quiet, they're probably even more so in this virtual working world. So I think actively kind of pulling and soliciting feedback on their wants and needs and challenges is really important. You can do that through surveys or focus groups or, whatever. But I think making sure that you're being inclusive in this new world of work is really important. Back in the days when we were all working in the office, that might be a lot easier to pull when you bump into somebody in the hallway or you have like a team lunch. But those opportunities are, a bit slimmer now. So I think making sure that we're as inclusive as we can in this modern world is really important.
Vincent, I go first. Yeah. If I have a wish list, there are two groups of people I would love to engage that I typically in my daily work I don't have a chance. One is kids in school, because I think I would love to engage in conversation about how they see the future and what questions they have in mind and the kind of future they want to create. I'd like to hear from the kids. I think on the other end of the spectrum is the aged in the society, is how so far they have been through all these changes, digitalization, digital world. They are forced to have a mobile phone. Now they don't use. They usually typically don't have, and now they're forced to have a mobile phone because that become your you can't leave home without it. Kind of scan the safe distancing kind of stuff, and then communicate. I also want to hear from them what is the kind of live experience in the digital society and and are there things that we can do better so that whether they feel they're excluded or they think they have no choice anyway, you force me to be digital literate, or other things that we can work together. Yeah, I think we'll be the very young and the older generation. Thank you.
I second everything that's been said. If I have to add something, maybe so I lead a team at Demos Helsinki, and the team I lead is specifically on expanding agency of actors. Our premise is basically that the systemic challenges that we're facing, in particular climate change, but also the transformation of work, the changes in infrastructure, there's quite a few large generational changes that we should solve in the 21st century, are basically systemic, and so require everyone to take part. And not only kind of, saying it's a policy issue, so it's the government, actually it's a problem of the private sector, or actually it's like all of us that needs to change, and passing the kind of hot potato of just saying, no, it is everyone. However, and so to the answer of what are the groups, it's not so much for us, what are the groups that are missing, but how do you enable the groups to have that level of agency? And the approach is slightly different. A debate that we often have is, should we work with large multinationals that have already so much agency on how the world is shaped? And in agency, there are two parts. There is the ability, there is the power, if you want, the impact, but there is also the kind of direction, the purpose, the deliberate nature. And unfortunately, in some respects, historically, traditionally, corporations are based on the Friedman doctrine, if you want, of that the societal role of a corporation is to grow its profits. We think that that's probably not enough today. And so how do you work, and we have tools and methodologies that we built over like a decade and a half on, like, how do you enable long-term foresight, long-term perspective, and long-term strategy with concrete actions for these actors, so that it's not only like, yeah, I'm just reacting to market forces here, but actually to have the ability to work there. And so that's the case for corporations, but individuals would be very different. Individuals, there's probably the desire is there. It's how does the system support them? How does services and products enable you to be the green society, so socially conscious person that you actually aspire to? So these are different. Governments would be another type of supported in terms of agency. So there are a lot of different tools, different approaches, to the point that Seungju said, saying like children. I think that's a really important one. Like, how do you enable youth to take part in this? And also kind of in a way, future generations. I love the example from the city of Kyoto, and I know that's not only the only place, but where they do municipal deliberations on future decisions, building a bridge here or doing something at the municipal level, they actually take a part of the population and give them the role of representing the generation in 25 years. So in the conversation, you have people who don't, kind of necessarily think for their own perspective, but from others. So there are very concrete like tools and approaches that can enable that level of agency in different actors.
Thank you for that. There are a couple of questions that we're not going to be able to get to, I warned you all, but no, thank you for getting them. And I just want to respect everyone's time. We've talked a lot about decision making and making those decisions right through from the stuff. So before I hand it over, because we've been talking, and I'm borrowing Seungju, I love the framing, right? We've been talking a lot about the macro and the meso level. Let's go right into that micro individual level about, in the spirit of being learner workers, right? So I'll put all of you all on the spot. From a personal level, what's the next thing you want to learn as just as an individual? For me, like, I was thinking about it, is like financial accounting. Like, I think that's something I want to learn professionally, and personally I want to learn how to draw a circle. That's actually a circle, and actually I'm taking classes for that online, so that's what I want to learn. I was thinking, Seungju.
Yeah, I started learning fine arts some 5 years ago. So it's oil, different media, and this year I decided that I want to use digital media to do my fine arts, and I just started on that. It's difficult because left hand is control the keyboard, I and B, it's eyedropper and brush, and then the left hand is trying to use the Wacom a pen and it's strange that you don't draw on the screen, but I draw on the pad itself, and then the screen is supposed to move. It's a kind of total change for me to use the media to learn fine arts, but I determined that by end of this year, I want to produce at least 2 pieces of digital arts. So that's my to-do list on learning.
Amazing. Vincent?
Oh, so many things. But I may be moving probably this year to another part of Europe. This is the digital world we live in, that, you know, I don't necessarily have to stay in the city I'm in currently, and it might be in Italy, so Italian would be extremely useful to actually start learning. So
Amazing. And Linda, to round us off.
I attempted to learn how to like paint during COVID with a paintbrush and like paint, but failed miserably despite some YouTube tutorials. So I've given up on that temporarily. I guess in terms of work, you probably heard me mention like flexibility and agility a few times. And one of the things that I want to do is learn agile principles and concepts around agility to enable my team to be more agile, as we are supporting so many employees in all these interesting countries. And as a company, you know, our CEO wants our company to be more agile. So as we grow and scale, you know, we're still aligned, we're not hampered down by bureaucracy or processes. So I've been thinking a lot about how to enable our organization and our leaders to be more agile. So those are some things that I've been learning about these few months. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. Now I'll hand everyone back to the safe hands of Ani and team to round us off. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vignan and panelists, for such a fascinating conversation. You know, behind the screen, I turned off my camera after a while because, you know, I was busy sort of, can you see this, the mind map of all of our conversations? Yeah, I was trying to kind of piece the dots and try to kind of, you know, so that I can add, you know, some intelligent comment at the end. So I think one of a few key things that really kind of struck me is, you know, we started off from the futures of work as starting point, but I think at the end we kind of branch out to a more futures of XX, things like, you know, futures of L&D, futures of skills, features of workspace, you know, and I really like particularly this discussion around culture and society-driven, you know, definition of features of work, right? Because I think just to quickly answer your question on what's missing also, Vignan, is that, you know, in a lot of our conversation today, we kind of, you know, mentioned a lot around, you know, could we ask everybody to work from home? But then one of the questions that I have is that, are all homes work ready? Right? And, you know, if you talk about Singapore and a few big cities, it may be the case. But if you talk about, you know, district offices in the Cambodia, or, you know, in some other islands in Indonesia, can you ask them to work from home, even for the civil servants? So these are some of the kind of questions that quickly immediately pop up in my head, that, you know, that as there are some assumptions, you know, when you talk about futures thinking, you know, we often talk about assumptions and that context matters. So and another quick thought that I have is also that, you know, when the notion of working from home, what will happen to the work-life balance? I mean, or imbalance, right? Or on the positive note, some people call it work-life integration instead. But can we really have that? I think, you know, and I just want to sort of end on a positive note, borrowing from Sunju's sort of term earlier, that we will survive, because futures of work is actually not a new notion. And so long as, you know, we keep working on our sort of learning and capability development, and this is where, you know, we are plugging the gap, and this is about time for me to do my marketing pitch along that working learners. If I can get my slides back. Yeah, before we end, I just wanted to quickly say that, my colleague has put the link to the evaluation in the chat. So appreciate it if you could, fill up and give us some feedback. This is the 3rd episode in this 2nd season that we are going into more of topical approach as opposed to the 1st season where we curate the conversation around public management angle of futures, in institutionalizing futures in the organization. On the next slides, please. The next episode will be happening on the 25th of May. And this time we are going to talk about features of sustainability. So stay tuned. We are going to have very cool and awesome environmentalists and some experts from the sustainability area. And the next one, yes, this is right on spot on Sunju's topic on working learners. Don't worry about thinking of what to learn and what to pick up, to continue, building your capability and capacity. We do offer a couple of courses, and some of the courses that are coming up, we do have features of public policy, in-person classes at the NUS Bukit Timah campus going on from 13 to 16 September. I think earlier we mentioned a lot around agility. So we do have in-person as well, an executive programs. And this is Skills Futures Singapore funded program. So thanks to Skills Futures for subsidizing the program fee. And if you're interested, you can always scan the QR code. Last but not least, if you would like to reach out to us for any further collaboration, or if you have any topics that you would like to suggest to us to be covered in this Futures Forward webinar, do reach out to us, and we are very welcome to hear out from you. For now, until then, it's been a really great pleasure. Thank you very much, the audience, for joining us. And may I invite everybody to thank our wonderful moderator as well as, awesome panelists here. Thank you very much, Vignan, Sunju, Vincent, and Linda. Until we see each other here in Singapore or elsewhere, take care and see you. Bye-bye.